Services for the city of Taylor, and I'm so excited that you guys are here tonight. I got here at about 10 minutes to 5, and that's when the sky opened up, and I was like, oh no, nobody's going to come tonight. But thank you all for braving the weather and coming out. I think this will be a fun evening, hopefully, for you all, and we really appreciate your input. So just a few logistics. The restrooms are outside the double doors to the left in the back of the room. So there's restrooms and water fountains back there. We also have some bottled water in this red cooler and a few snacks. We didn't bring a ton, so we just figured somebody might have the need for some calories before the end of the evening. So, if you haven't signed in on the back table, I would encourage you to do that before you leave, just so that we can stay in contact with you and send you information about the next steps of the process. I also want to remind everybody that all of the information that we're going to be sharing with you tonight is also going to be on the website for the Comprehensive Plan Update Project, which we'll share with you throughout the evening, but it's also linked on the homepage of the City of Taylor website, so you should be able to find that. And we will also be videoing the presentation portion of this meeting, and Kendra over here is live streaming this on Facebook as well, the presentation portion, and so that video will also be available on the website. So if you wanted to go back and refresh your memory on what was said during the presentation, you'll be able to do that as well as we'll just have the slides from the presentation on the website also. So, and if you can't find anything, you can always call me or email me, and I'm happy to share that contact information with you before you leave tonight. So it is my great pleasure to introduce the mayor of the city of Taylor, Brent Rydell, and he's going to give you a little intro into why you're here tonight and why we think it's really important. So with that, Mayor Rydell.
Thank you, Tom. My name is Brent Rydell, and it's my honor and privilege to serve as the mayor of the city of Taylor. I'm joined this evening by at least two of my fellow council members, Mayor Pro Tem Gerald Anderson, back over here, and Councilor Mitch Drummond in that corner, and Councilmember Robert Garcia and Councilmember Dwayne Ariola were unable to attend this evening. But this is a critically important exercise that we have embarked on here. It's been in the works for well over a year now. And it is not an overstatement. That is probably the most important thing that has been undertaken since I've been on the Taylor City Council. They all of us realize that we're at a very critical juncture in Taylor's history. The growth and development pressures are mounting to a point I don't think we've seen in 100 years in Taylor. And some of you may know, I just recently got off the campaign trail trying to re-up on my job here with the city of Taylor. And I'm always surprised every 3 years when I go out and hear from people what their concerns are. And the concern about Taylor and the growth and the effect it would have on our community was first and foremost in most people's minds. And what I heard from them, well, some people said, look, we don't want growth at all. We want Taylor to be just like this forever. Or maybe be the Taylor was 50 years ago. We like that when we were growing up. We want to be like that again. But beyond that, when they got real, they said at least wanted to preserve the character of Taylor. They loved the kind of town Taylor was and wanted to see that preserved. And I think what resonated with them was the character was built up over sort of the built environment, how we developed over time. Taylor is not like one of these suburbs of Austin that kind of just blew up overnight and had sprawling development, kind of a generic, faceless feel to it. There's a lot of character and authenticity about this town, and that's what resonates with people. And people want to see that continue. But that doesn't just happen. Left to its own devices, Taylor is not immune to the same pressures that everyone else feels. And you can get overrun with this growth and development pressures that don't necessarily have the interests of the community at stake. And that's why something like this is so important, that we hear from all of you about what you want to see Taylor be in the future. I mean, you don't have to look very far from here to see what Taylor's future could be.
Yeah.
And some people like that. I think most people who live in Taylor because we're not like some of these other communities. And the secret is, people say they want smart growth. We want smart growth, we want development that serves the community well. It's easy to say, it's harder to do. And this process is part about putting that in place to ensure that we have the Taylor that we're all going to be proud of well in the future, and all critical pieces of that. And I can't thank you enough for being part of this and being with us here this evening. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to the MC, Rebecca Leonard from Lionheart, who's done a phenomenal job for us with the City of Taylor and our comprehensive planning process, and she's going to take it from here. Ms. Leonard.
All right, ringleader. It's maybe more like a circus term that should be my title tonight. First, I want to welcome y'all to this meeting as well. I usually know everybody by name by the time we get to the last public meeting of a comprehensive plan, but given that all of them were Zoom meetings up till now, unfortunately, I may look you right in the eye and met you 4 times and still not make the connection. So, welcome also to the new world of hybrid meetings, which is the next frontier, part in person and part live streaming online. And so we worked really hard to prepare for all the contingencies we could have, but there will be a portion of this later tonight that is a workshop session. So for those of you who are live streaming right now, there's still time to race in and be part of that later on in the evening. So I'm Rebecca Leonard. I own a planning, landscape architecture, and urban design firm here in Austin. And we have been asked to facilitate your community's conversation, but this is really your conversation. This is not our plan, this is your plan. We've been asking questions as we go along and building a plan that you all can be proud of when it's finished. I want to introduce a few folks from my team here. They'll be facilitators during the breakout session later. We've got Abby Goflin, she's part janitor, getting chairs out. She's also a fantastic planner. And I've got Maitri Fanstalker. She's over also helping with the chairs. She's been one of the planners on our team. Kevin Shepard with Verdunity. He's an adopted member of Lionheart for this project, and he's been helping with the financial modeling of the future land use map and things. And then we have Leslie Pollitt from HDR back in the back corner back here. She's brought some really great ideas about how to do transportation differently here in Taylor, so we're excited to be here. I'm going to press this. Give myself. Did you? All right.
Is it plugged in? Yeah, it is. Okay, good.
Thank you. Okay, look at that. So, a couple housekeeping items. As I mentioned, there's still time to get here. If you're live streaming, there will be, after the presentation tonight, in the next couple days, we'll have this meeting online that you can review if you want to watch it again, or you can also participate in a poll that we'll have up online as well. So there will be some feedback loops even after tonight on some of the materials you see here, because a lot of times you'll get home and go, oh, I wish I thought of saying that. So tonight's agenda, we're going to talk about the shaping the future of Taylor, and that's really code for all the maps back here that you see, cross sections and different land uses and things. So we'll go over that. Kevin's going to present a little bit of the FISCAL model that supports the future land use plan. And then we're going to change as quickly as we can into implementation, because that's the real fun stuff. How are we going to make this plan actually happen? And so that's what the small group breakouts are going to be about tonight, is thinking about strategies to make sure that we deliver on the vision that's been set up. Am I breaking things already?
Here, you give me that, I'll fix it while you keep talking.
Okay, perfect. Oh, there we go. All right. So let's just jump right in. What is a comprehensive plan? Some of you may be wondering that. Some of you might not have been at the previous meetings. The current comprehensive plan for Taylor was written in 2004. And so think about how much has changed since 2004. A lot has changed in Taylor, but there's also been a lot that's been changing around Taylor. over the last decade. You're about 35 miles from Austin, and Austin is night and day different than it was in 2004. The growth has been astounding in Austin and continues today. With a population of about 18,500, Taylor's on the verge of a lot of residential growth happening. Just next door, Hutto is like doubling per year its population. And so that's something to keep an idea on. And so the purpose of a comprehensive plan is really to establish a solid framework for making decisions about that growth, so that you're not always just reacting to things. You're actually thought of it ahead of time, and you know where you want to put that kind of growth pressure that's coming to your community, and you know how it's going to look. You want to wake up 20 years from now and feel like you had some control and say over all the growth that's coming your direction. You want to maintain Taylor's historic development patterns while also accommodating this growth. It creates a vision and communicates to varied players, developers, landowners, investors, what this community is really about, and sends a powerful message in and of itself. In addition, you can also start gearing city policies towards this comprehensive plan. And so things like zoning and investing in capital improvements and that kind of thing would follow the comprehensive plan. Comprehensive plans are not updated all the time, every year. It's really, it's been, 17 years since your last one? That's a little long. I recommend you all do that a little more regularly than that. But still, they last 8 to 12 years. You're thinking long term, and then you're revisiting it on a regular basis. These conversations make it a lot easier for you as a community to know what's a good project and what's a bad project when one comes, but also staff and all your elected officials and appointed officials. So a little bit about the process. Last fall, we held the first of 3 main workshops on this project. This community dialogue resulted in a narrative expressing the vision and the goals of the project. It's on the left side of that. What do you value most? What should we be planning for in the future? What are the opportunities and the big challenges? We will go over some of those big ideas later on this evening. Next, this spring, we had another dialogue where we discussed potential scenarios for developing the future of Taylor. And if nothing stays the same forever, how do you want it to change? Which direction do you want to take? The status quo or something different? And then tonight, we'll be looking at the preferred growth scenario and determine how to implement it with implementation strategies that could include projects, like capital projects, policies, like zoning code revisions, or also programs. You've got a great Main Street program. There's other programs that could be part of this. And finally, we'll be adopting a plan later on this summer or fall. There will be an opportunity for more engagement between now and then. I said we've got a nice online presence that you can engage in, but also there will be hearings, public hearings associated with it. There are other opportunities for that. So the messages that we've been hearing through this process have been really exciting. And, it's so different from the messages we hear in other communities. So I have to commend you all. You really are as unique as you're the physical fabric of your community. Some of these messages are, we need a relief from the cost burden of all this infrastructure we have to maintain. So financial sustainability, financial responsibility, all of that has been a common theme in all of the conversations we've had. Wanting to preserve the character of Taylor, that's been an important topic. You're realistic about the amount of growth coming your way, and you're not putting your head in the sand, which is really remarkable. A lot of communities do that. You're prepared for more infill and to keep neighborhoods healthy and vibrant and the infrastructure costs low, and that's exciting. So those are some of the common themes we've been hearing as we go forward, as we've been going through this process. There's been an advisory committee. How many of you are advisory committee members? Could you just raise your hand? So it's a pretty good cross-section of your community. There's 12 members and 3 ex officio members. And the purpose of this Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee is to utilize local knowledge in a variety of points of view into the process. They are there to help advise us, help communicate out to the community different concepts, advice the city council staff on relevant issues and opportunities. They've been a good sounding board, and you've done your work well, but I understand you're having extra credit meetings next week, so that's exciting too. Thank you for your dedication. These workshops have been designed to be interactive, informative, and meaningful towards the effort of shaping, the future in this community vision. There's been a strong social media presence throughout this and online presence as well. You'll be able to go there tonight if you want to and take a look at all the previous meetings. And finally, we share materials with community activists to take their own meetings around the community if they'd like. So just a couple things. I wanted to kind of walk us through the highlight reels from previous things. The comprehensive plan sets policy and guides growth, but they also document history as well. So it's important. So early on, we looked backwards and we said, what's been happening in Taylor? A couple interesting things have come forward. The early growth tracking has been slow and steady in Taylor. You're the green down at the bottom. So you have been growing, but just very slow and steady. But you're in this region that's been growing exponentially. And all of that is headed your way as well, like it or not. And we got to figure out how to deal with that kind of pressure. So one of the early tasks of the community was to come up with a population projection that we needed to plan for. So we did this 3 or 4 different ways and presented that at the first meeting. This is the projection that we've been moving forward with the plan. You've got about just shy of 18,000 units now. We're projecting adding 22,000 by 2040. And that's a total of about 40,000 units by 2040. People, yes, I'm sorry. Yeah. And so that's about 128% growth. That's high, but if you're looking at your neighbors, that's not unrealistic that this is going to happen. Over half of the participants at those early meetings thought that this was a realistic projection, and another 10% said it was too low. So something to keep in mind. Some of those early conversations in the online polls that we had, we started to see some common themes, and I just wanted to go over those with you. 2 overriding principles: resiliency and fiscal responsibility. And again, that is going to set you apart from almost every other city in the metro region of Austin. You're thinking about resiliency, you're thinking about fiscal responsibility, and you're doing that up front before it's happened to you. So that's great. But some of the other big ideas are community character. Your downtown, your neighborhoods, all of these are treasured places. The development pattern that's been here for 100 years is something that you all appreciate. And again, that also sets you apart from some of the new suburbs that have just really evolved. Or, take Hutto, they had to create their own downtown. You guys have a fantastic downtown already. Inclusive growth. So this is one that it's about the people. We kept hearing that from the beginning. Taylor's nice, the physical Taylor is nice, but the people are what make it special. And so we want to make sure that everybody has a part in growth, and everybody has a say in it, everybody has an opportunity to make something valuable out of that growth. Diverse housing was another thing. You guys didn't want a community where you don't live here during your early years, and when you wanted to start a family, you had to move, or when you became a senior, you had to move. You wanted a place where you could live your whole life. Many of you have lived your whole life here, and so that's something we want to continue. Fiscal sustainability and infrastructure, really balancing that, has been a topic of conversation, again, an overriding principle. And making sure that we don't get out over our skis, as I say, we've got so much infrastructure that the only way out of this dilemma is to grow. We want to grow because we need to or we want to, not because we have to pay for previous, ignoring of issues. And so that's been a common theme. And then finally, economic resilience and making sure that we're promoting the unique local businesses in Taylor. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the future plans after Kevin. I forgot, you're first. Okay, so Kevin's going to walk us through a little bit more history.
Thanks, Rebecca. Who here cares about your property value and the return on your taxpayer dollars? Okay, so not to take away from Rebecca in this process, but things like land use, zoning, street design, those can be tough for the average citizen to connect with, right? So a big part of what we've done is try to connect development patterns and these different growth trajectories of communities back to the revenue for your cities. So let me back up for a second. When we look at cities' strategic plans, comprehensive plans, most cities will say some version of this. We want to be fiscally responsible or sustainable, environmentally resilient, socially inclusive. But when you look at the daily decisions and the policies in those communities, they rarely align with those outcomes. And what we get are fragile local economies, escalating service costs and infrastructure, which we're going to talk about here in a second, disconnected residents. And at the same time, when you go inside City Hall and you talk with staff, folks like Tom and others, that they feel like a little bit stuck. We're administering policies and programs that lead to generic places, Anytown, USA, places ultimately that citizens and businesses struggle to connect with and, more importantly, invest in, right? How many of you have skipped around from city to city, right? How many of you want to stay in Taylor? Right? So I've worked a lot nationally, and so many places, you could blindfold me, drop me down in a different city. I would have no idea where I am because everywhere looks the same, right? The one place of a community that's different is your downtown. For Taylor, though, you've got neighborhoods around downtown. You've got other parts of the community that make you different. So it's interesting to be here in Central Texas and Rebecca talking about some of the other communities around you, right? We're seeing post-World War II, 1950 and on, this race of communities, not just in Texas, but across the country, to be the best place to live, work, play. How can we grow? But at the same time, we're not and haven't been thinking about the long-term impacts, especially fiscal impacts of those decisions. So what about maintenance after growth? This is a real place. This is up in Missouri. I've seen a lot of places like this that at one time were best place to live, work, play. They have the wealth, they have the investment, they have the homes, the new schools, the new buildings. But at some point, the city couldn't maintain these places, and the wealth and the investment moves out, and you end up in a cycle of decline, right? So I challenge a lot of folks when we say at the city level, we're fiscally responsible. I'm like, are you really? A lot of our elected officials say that we are. I think your leadership here in Taylor really wants you to be truly fiscally sustainable and good stewards of the resources, land, infrastructure, and the money that you guys contribute to the city. So we ask, is Taylor financially resilient and sustainable? Do we have enough money to pay for infrastructure and services? Not just now, but in the future. And then the third part, if we don't, how do we close that gap? And that's the role, to me, that a comprehensive plan really plays, is how do you get out in front of this and grow in a way that can help you close that gap and then be fiscally sustainable down the road. So the plan's going to have more background on this, and there's previous presentations where I went through this in more detail. But we looked at what is your general fund per acre today? What is the pot of money coming into the city, mostly from property tax, a little bit from sales tax, and take that on a per acre basis across the whole city. You're a little bit over $1,700 per acre. 48% of that is coming from property tax. That's pretty resilient compared to some other places that we've looked that have a much lower percentage coming from property tax. Where you need to get to, around $5,000 per acre is where you need to get just to cover your current costs. To cover just to fix the streets and the services that you have in Taylor today, that's where you need to get to. Ultimately, you're looking at up $8,000, $10,000 an acre and higher. This is the big reason why. This is your streets. This is a high-level estimate, but just to replace the streets in Taylor today, you would need over $124 million. The average life of a street in Taylor, 20 to 25 years. That comes out, if you just do a straight average, you're looking at around $6.2 million a year that you would need. And at the time we did this, the current street budget, just the general fund portion, was 1.7 a year. So you had a deficit there of over $4 million a year just to fix the streets that you have. How many of you knew that was an issue in Taylor? Okay. That's actually good, because in some places, no hands go up. They think, well, I'm paying property taxes on my street's gonna be fixed, right? That's one of the side conversations that I find myself having is, you go to a resident and I'll ask, when your street needs to be fixed, do you think your city has money to pay for it? Of course they do, I pay property taxes. Well, I don't. And so your engineering guys are constantly looking at which ones do we fix and when to try to keep up. This is one of a number of maps that we did to kind of show and illustrate this. We've got 2D, we also can flip this in 3 dimensions so you can look at it some different ways. But this shows your kind of the revenue per acre. I'm not sure, so this is the net revenue per acre. So this is, the way we did the modeling is first what you have right now, and then we, in terms of revenue production for your property. So for each parcel in the city, we looked at how much property tax revenue it generates. And then the first level of cost that we did is look at, in your current budget, how much does it cost to serve that property, right? So you get kind of a profit and loss map or a red-green map. Anything that's red is costing more to serve. Anything that's blue or green is making more than it costs to serve. That usually shows a lot of green, and for Taylor, it showed a lot of green too. But the last step we go to is, if you add in those street costs, and you say, if we had really what we needed to maintain what we built and have the services and everything that we want as a community, what does that look like? That's what this map is. And usually when we do this, you'll see the current budget has a lot of green. When we add in the unfunded costs, most of a city will go into the red. But what we did with this is look at it and say, which types of development patterns stay green? Which ones held their value even when you load more cost into it, right? As red as this looks, this is way better than most communities that we look at. The reason why is that historical development pattern that the mayor was talking about. So when we talk about how do we close this resource gap, there's really, I'm oversimplifying here, but there's 3 options. We can keep our development pattern the way it is, and we can keep our service levels where they are, and we can charge more through higher taxes and fees to close that gap. Raise your hand if you would like to pay more in taxes or fees to close the gap. Nobody? Second one, let's keep our tax rate where it is, but let's reduce our services and our development footprint maybe to align with revenues. That's really what's happening today in most cities. When we do a capital improvement program, we look at what streets or what projects can we pay for. There's always a long list, and we pay for a portion of them, right? Anything we can't pay for gets deferred to a future year. The problem is that list of things being deferred is getting bigger, not smaller, right? An extreme version of this is Memphis, Tennessee. They've actually reduced the size of their city to start to get things in balance. You go to other parts of the country, they're letting roads go back to gravel because they just can't maintain them all. Or you see neighborhoods that look like that one that I showed earlier. How many of you want your street or anywhere in Taylor to look like that previous picture? Nobody, right? So the third option, the good news here, is how do we get out of this? We shift our development pattern and our infrastructure design a little bit. And by infrastructure design, I mostly mean street design. Leslie's back there in the back. But how many of you know what like a 1 lane mile of a road costs? Somewhere, if it's asphalt, 500 to 700,000. If it's concrete, it's $1 million or more for 1 11-foot mile of pavement. So if your residential street that you're on is 33 feet wide, so you have 3 lanes basically, that's $3 million a mile to fix that street. So the flip of that is every foot you can take off the width of your street is saving you money down the road. So it leads to more of a balance or a conversation about, we're not just designing our roads to be as wide or have as many lanes. We're thinking about it from a dollar perspective of what's the value, what's the return. How many of you would be willing to sit in traffic a little bit longer to avoid having to pay more in fees or taxes? This is a little bit tougher question. Okay. So how can we shift our development pattern and our infrastructure design to ultimately find that balance between services and what people are willing and able to pay. Some people are willing to pay more, but they don't want to. Some people are able to pay more, but they're not willing to, right? We're looking at what is the community of Taylor willing and able to pay for, and how does the city work to align that development pattern with that? Rebecca's got, I love these little clouds, by the way. 87% of survey respondents felt the city should shift the development pattern. That's a big shift in how cities think about how they develop. Here's some of the numbers behind this, right? When we look at return on investment of development patterns, which ones, if you look at the carpet here, right? We've got some squares of carpet, interesting pattern. But think about your land in Taylor. Every acre of land you build is going to generate some revenue back to the city in property tax or sales tax, but it's also going to cost you something in terms of that infrastructure to get to it and serve it, right? So some patterns will generate more in revenue than the cost to serve, and some cost more to serve than revenue. This is what we dug into and looked at, not just for Taylor, but a lot of different communities. But this is a good one that sums it up. On the left, you see your traditional grid downtown, eight blocks. One of those actually, this one right here, is basically just public space, right? That's not generating any property tax revenue to the city. So if we take the total property tax revenue generated by those 8 blocks, we divide it by the total acreage, you get over $12,000 per acre in tax productivity there, right? Compare that to the right. The right property is 17 acres, so the left side was 13 acres. So you have a bigger footprint, a bigger area of land for the Walmart here on the right, but look what the tax productivity is. Which one of those is a better return on investment to Taylor? Which one of those do you guys actually like better in terms of fitting the character of Taylor? Okay, good. So your top 10. Top 10 here, we always do this for every city. Some of them are kind of telling and interesting. We just did one the other day. Like 7 of their top 10 were hotels. Not a good community. You guys, most of yours are right here in downtown. I'll show you what these actually look like. They're on the left. I don't know the exact address, though. They're just up the top, 201 North Main. That's one of your most productive properties, right? Over 25,000. It's only 4/10 of an acre. It's hardly any land footprint, but it's generating $10,000 in property tax revenue, which comes to over $25,000 per acre, right? So one little tiny footprint is generating. You could add up a bunch of bigger properties in the city that don't come close to that, right? And that's a good looking building that has good stuff in it. That, oh, by the way, is also bringing sales tax on top of this, right? The stuff on the right, the B and the B and S. The B is the, we've changed that since we did. The B is what's the net revenue per acre for the current budget. So if we take current budget costs, the services that are paid from property taxes, and we pull that out, it's still netting you over $23,000 per acre, positive revenue to the city. If we add in the unfunded streets on top of that, you're still generating $22,000 net, right? Where all of this is going, and Rebecca's going to hit this in a minute, but when you guys looked at your growth scenarios, you were presented with 2 options. Do we do the current trend business as usual, which is grow out and get suburban growth, everything, and you guys know what that looks like. It's all around you, right? That's what a lot of cities are building, is we're building fast, we're building out, and as you build out, you're adding infrastructure and services to your community, and you're getting kind of the sugar rush of the development in the short term. You're getting all of those new homes and the new neighborhoods and all that makes you look like, best place to live, work, play, right? But that pattern is very hard to sustain fiscally, and that's ultimately why I started my company 10 years ago, is to get at this for Texas. Because I saw the decline happen around the country, and we're in a place in Texas, we're blessed to still have the growth and the revenue and the wealth that we can change our patterns. But it is hard work in a lot of places still in Texas to get them to want to change this pattern. So I'm so excited to see how this this project ultimately gets to the end. But the two scenarios you guys looked at were continue business as usual, which you have those 40,000 people coming here, and do you go out? Taylor has a lot of area to grow. Do you put them out, or do you focus on infill? Do you put them in your current footprint? Don't add roads, don't add additional services, additional area that you have to provide police or fire, any of that to. Just bring those people into the area that you have. You guys, what was it, 84% of people supported the infill scenario. What does infill look like? Some people's like, oh, density, that scares me. Adding people, that's a scary thought. Generally, yes, the more people you put in an area, the more fiscally productive it's going to be. But you don't want to overdo it, right? You don't want to turn Taylor into New York City. Just these couple examples I'm going to go through show what does infill look like in Taylor and how powerful it can be. So on the left, vacant lot, it's assessed value $5,000, I think 2019. The tax revenue that the city was getting a whopping $39 in property tax revenue for that piece of property, which it's served by a street, it's served by water and sewer, police and fire. If something happens out there, the city has to respond to it, right? And for all those services, it's paying you $39 a year, right? Building goes on it. Look how the numbers change. No additional service cost to the city. No new street, no water, it was all already there. All you did was put a building on that property. A pretty good looking building that diversifies your housing, adds some different housing to it. Bump that revenue per acre up to $9,000. You got a net revenue increase of $8,800 per acre, right? Okay, that's one example. Let's look at another one. Here's another one on the left. Same assessed value. Put a building on it. This one bumps you up $10,000. This one I thought was a little interesting because there was already a building on it. $60,000 assessed value, $470 in tax revenue, $3,000 per acre in revenue. But they did some additional development to it, probably added some square footage or another unit to it, bumped that assessed value up to $187,000. That one again. So as you start stacking these on top of each other, one after one, you're not adding service costs to the city, but you're bringing in additional revenue. You're adding homes and units for people to live in, right? Oh, by the way, a lot of these are smaller units that are more affordable that either your seniors or your young professionals or younger folks who can't afford the bigger single-family home. This is the kind of stuff they're looking for that a lot of the communities around you, they don't have, and they can't build, right? You guys are already building these things. It's so cool to have an example like this where we can rattle off 3, 4, 5 examples where you've already done it. And all we're going to say is do a lot more of this. There's 8,000, and then here's one last one. 25,000 assessed value. Put 2 stories on this one. The assessed value jumps up to 700,000 on this one. You're getting a revenue increase of almost 15,000 per acre. Does that make sense to you guys? Does this concept make sense? Do any of those buildings look scary to you? Do those buildings fit the character of Taylor? So raise your hand if you would support building more of that in Taylor. So the takeaways from not just this fiscal analysis that we did for Taylor, but 40-something that we've done in Texas and other parts of the country, these are pretty common takeaways that we see and recommendations that we made to Rebecca and the team and to staff to go forward here. Focus growth into the core. You guys have so much to build on here. There's no reason to go out and, right now at least, to go outward and build. Just focus on who you are and build more of it. Provide more smaller units. The smaller units tend to be the highest revenue per acre return to the city. They're also the more affordable options. A lot of cities that we talk to think bigger lots equals more value to the city. Not always the case, because bigger lots require more to serve. So there is a price point. You get big enough and the value gets high enough, that starts to pivot. But by and large, these smaller units always do better to the city. And it's not, I want to also emphasize, it's not about one pattern is better than another. It's kind of like a personal investment portfolio. You want a mix of different types. If you build way too much of one, you open yourself up to risk. And that's what a lot of communities around the country and and here in Texas are starting to build is we're building a whole lot of, half-acre, $250,000 detached single-family homes with wide streets and what I call loops and lollipops, right? The winding streets and cul-de-sacs. That stuff, those are an absolute fiscal black hole money pit for cities. And we're building a ton of them really fast. You guys haven't, which is why your numbers look better and why you have stronger potential to close that gap quickly. Number 3, encourage narrow streets and a grid pattern. Leslie, I think, and her team have done a great job of looking at a different way to approach mobility. You don't always need small little streets that feed into the thoroughfares, that feed into the wider streets, that as you grow, there's no amount of lanes you can build that's going to keep traffic from happening, right? If you think about a grid pattern, what happens with a grid? If one street is closed or if there's traffic on one, what can you do? You go one block over and around, right? Google will give you 8 million different ways to get there. My wife still hasn't figured that out, by the way, but she's still like, I'm going that way. But a grid pattern gives you a lot of options. The narrow streets are a little bit cheaper, and they're also safer because they slow the cars down. 4, fill in undeveloped lots. You guys have a lot of undeveloped lots in the core of the city. Number 5, prioritize maintenance and improvement of existing streets. From the engineering side, fix it first. And I've said this, I've been on a couple calls nationally too for all the federal infrastructure stuff. Fix it first. Fix what we have first before we go build more, right? And then lastly, any new development you do, if you're going to go out, make sure it's done in a way that's going to pay for itself. Don't have it be something that's going to make your gap bigger, right? So I'm going to turn it back over to Rebecca, and she's going to tell you how all this is going to happen.
All right. All right. So, as I mentioned, we came to the last meeting with a couple options for y'all to think about, and we ran some scenarios on it. One was the trend scenario. Large lot, this was following the existing trends of development now in Taylor, but also in surrounding suburban areas. And so, bigger lots, cul-de-sacs, loops, and lollipops, or whatever he called them before. More single-use buildings, single-use retail, single-use office, single-use residential. Greenfield land developing, so 22% of your land, was going to be developed under that scenario there, under rural land, and more new roads being built. This was pretty much business as usual on the left side. And then on this side, the fiscal scenario, we tried to be more we tried to take that last slide and put it into practice here. And so large lot single family and the rest are missing middle. So we reduced the amount of large lot single family. A greater number of non-residential buildings that are multi-story and mixed use. So more mixed use, less single use retail, like that Walmart you saw, or fast food place. And then fewer new roads, trying to keep things compact and infill, prioritizing infill, that kind of thing. So we brought those to the last meeting. And so we brought also these scenarios here. So, this is non-residential idea. Like on the trend scenario, it's more big box and single-use stuff. On the fiscal scenario, a little bit more mixing of uses and things along those lines. On the residential side, this could mean that in more mix of unit types and more density. So, in one scenario, it's the same unit repeated a few hundred times, and in another one, it's selectively infilling in parcels, and each one is a little bit different because it's all different developers that are doing that. And this idea, this fiscal scenario, we talked about how it really does support more than just the one goal of fiscal sustainability. It also supports other goals that you had, like character, for example. This got presented at both previous meetings, but think of the most interesting image is this annexation map here. It shows, let's see, this was the city limits, the square in 1954. And you can see the population density was 1.68 per acre of this whole area. And there's big chunks of it that even today are not developed. So back then, there was a lot more of it undeveloped. Today, your boundary is now sort of all out in the hinterlands around your community, and the population density has gone down 1.33 per acre. And so this, by getting a little bit more density into your core, that's actually bringing you closer to what you were always like before. And so that has some really great historic, precedent for it. So these were some of the numbers of the recent trends that we were seeing, and we built that trend scenario out on. So, the number of permits has been going up, the size of the housing has been going down, which is good as long as it's also becoming more dense as well, so that because the numbers that Kevin was showing were the dollars per acre, not the dollar per unit. So if you can get 6 acres where you might have had 4 in that acre, the numbers, exponentially get better. And so that's great. And the value per square foot was going up. So we brought this map to one of the previous meetings and talked about here's where the recent developments have been happening. You can see the orange ones are the infill lots, and the yellow ones are greenfield permits. And 17% of the growth was going in infill areas, and the rest of it was going into these 2 or 3 neighborhoods that we're developing. And we asked, should we focus more on the infill, or should we, focus more on these new neighborhoods? And 2/3 of the respondents felt that the city should increase the percentage of infill in there. So that was important feedback for us. And so these were the 2 scenarios we presented. Accommodated the projected population out on both of them, one of which was in a very similar fashion to what we've been seeing lately in Taylor, but certainly the surrounding communities, a lot more greenfield development. This FISCAL scenario got much more focused on those principles that Kevin mentioned. High ratio of building footprint to lot size, multi-story structures, narrow lot frontages, smaller lots, infill, lots more infill, and less streets. The good news is there's a lot of room to accommodate all the growth that I projected out there in those previous slides within your current city boundaries. You don't need to sprawl out to all corners of your city limits. You have plenty of room within these colored areas to grow and meet a very high population projection. So that's the good news. You don't have to go out there and start annexing people, The trend scenario was about 2.7 DU per acre, and the FISCAL scenario was about 3. 83% of the respondents said, go this direction. So that's where we've been heading since then. So, I'm going to high level go over these 3 key maps that they're back here, and you're going to want to get your looking glass out and take a real close look at all of them. And we want your input. There's sticky notes and people back there that can help you write stuff down. But there's 3 key maps here. There's a growth sector map. The first map here, it's basically saying where do we want growth to happen? Regardless of land use, where do we want this to happen? And so the way to read this is, the green here is open space, preserved open space, so it's kind of off the table for growth. Then we've got a reserved open sector, which is like floodplains and things that are mostly regulated out of development. And then we have restricted growth, which is kind of the farthest out areas in your city. And then controlled growth is this color here, and that is, growth could happen there, but it needs to be highly controlled because it would be building all new streets and developing a new development pattern. And so we want to make sure that it's doing it right, and so that's important. And then the intended growth sector. These are the areas that are, those are areas that we needed to be able to accommodate those population projections that we were telling you about at the beginning. And then we've got infill and neighborhood and infill growth sector. So infill neighborhood and infill kind of more mixed use and retail and industrial there. So this is just sort of saying where do we want growth to happen? Now inside those intended growth areas and the infill areas, this is what needs to go there. And so it describes a little bit more the land uses. And we talked about this in terms of a series of different kinds of centers, all of them mixed use to some degree, and then a couple different kinds of neighborhoods, infill neighborhoods and greenfield neighborhoods. And so that land use map kind of breaks it down like this, and there's more information about the centers in the back of the board. Happy to answer any questions that you might have on that. Again, we tried to keep the footprint as tight as we could to limit the amount of roads you have to build and maintain, and also, to protect that historic character that y'all have. And then the third ingredient in our maps here is a transportation master plan. And that's also innovative, because in a lot of master plans, it's like you have arterials, I drove in on 79, and then I pulled in on 2nd Street, and that would be like more of a collector maybe, and then you kind of keep going until you get to your house, on smaller and smaller roads. But what that does is it means everybody gets funneled out to the same places, and it creates traffic problems. And the arterials need to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and therefore they make worse and worse neighbors to houses and businesses and everything. You already have this beautiful grid of streets that has a hierarchy to it. You have big streets, you have medium streets, and you have small streets. And so we tried to get rid of the engineering, sorry, Leslie, and also Kevin, we tried to get rid of the engineering words and use more like, what's the character of the words? So we've got regional roads, and mostly those are county roads and state highways and things. And we've got community boulevards, like Lake Drive, Westlake Drive, 4th Street, 2nd Street. And the community boulevard, you can envision something more beautiful than an arterial or something, And then neighborhood avenues. These are what, might be called collectors in some circles, but we're calling them neighborhood avenues because they're meant not just for cars, to collect cars. They're meant to people, bicycles, scooters, whatever you guys want to drive, unicorns. I don't know what is all driven around here. So it would include all those modes, exactly. So the key takeaways from the growth modeling is that new development can be accommodated in a smaller footprint. So, where it might take Hutto, thousands and thousands of acres to develop, you guys can do it in a fraction of that because you have a different development pattern than they do. And therefore, it'll be easier to maintain and more fiscally sustainable. And it also fits your historic character as a community. And it restricts and limit driveway access to streets and accommodate multiple modes of transportation in your streets as well. So those were some of the key takeaways. We are scooching on through this stuff, and there's a lot, because I want to make sure we have time for this next exciting exercise, which is implementation strategies. So I'm not going to pause for any questions, but we're going to have open house time later. So write your questions down, and let's talk about it. Happy to. Leslie, you could drill her on transportation or fiscal stuff. Kevin and my team will prepare. All right. So switching gears to implementation. How are we going to get there? This is not just a given. You can't just write down a vision and expect it to happen. You got to take active steps, and each one's going to be hard. So, that's something to think about. Projects, I think of them as bulldozers and things like that. These are streets you need to build, water treatment plants. These are, things you need to do, capital improvements. Then there's programs. I mentioned your Main Street program, but, maybe there's a better litter program or, park maintenance program or something along those lines. And then policies. These are just the rules, the norms. These are your development regulations. They're also, when's trash pickup and that sort of thing. They're the policies that you operate from as a city. And so, and there might be future planning that you need to do as well. And so there's things that need to be done. And to make this easier for everybody and not come with a blank sheet, because that would take us, we'd be here till tomorrow morning, and probably still need more time. We came with some cards, strategy cards, and this is what we're going to do together in groups around these 4 tables. You're going to have a facilitator, and they've got a small deck of cards. I think it's about 17 to 20 strategies, and Kevin's waving them around there. Your facilitator will, for the first 10 minutes, go through and read each of those strategy cards for you. Here's one thing we can do, and give you an example. It's like, set up a conservation organization to preserve, some of the land in the outer parts of your city so it doesn't develop, as a sprawling neighborhood, for example. So that could be one, and you could say, as your table, you'll kind of all give a thumbs up or thumbs down. That's a high priority for me, or that's not a high priority for me. And if we get a mix, we can kind of do a middle cheat thing where you can say it's kind of lukewarm on that one. So we'll have 3 piles, a thumbs up, thumbs down, and then I'm not sure, we need to revisit. And then we're going to take about 10 minutes to put the thumbs up ones out on the table, and your table's going to put it in order of their priorities. This is the first thing I want to do. This strategy right here is the first thing I want to do. And you'll have to talk together, so you'll have to work as a community to figure out in your little table, if you were kings and queens of the day, what would you do first? And then, if you have time, tap into that middle one. But I'd say get at least 5 to 10 strategies in order, so we know those are your priority strategies as a table and there's agreement. And then we'll report back, and you can tell us, and just I'm going to have you race into how did you do that? Why did you do it that way? What's your rationale for that? And we'll record that, and we'll bake that into the plan as how we prioritize some of these strategies moving forward. So, yes. So that's the last slide of this presentation. I'm